This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the next 60 minutes, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. But let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. Anglo-American Platinum, they revised their forecast for headline earnings up by a fairly significant margin, anywhere between 100 and 128%. For essentially the half-year ending in June. Now, shares of the JSE have fallen by about 5% in the last month, but the year-to-date performance pretty impressive, up by almost 50%. Other than South Africa and Egypt, the other indices we track here closed in the red. This is the fifth straight fall for Nigeria's main index, in part because of a lack of policy direction. Elections were finished all the way in February, but remember, to date, Nigeria still doesn't have a cabinet. Here's what's coming up tonight. Zimbabwe civil servants go to the streets as wage talks are delayed yet again. Facebook is defending its digital currency, Libra, before American legislators. And we'll explore how rising unemployment is forcing graduates to start their own enterprises in Nigeria. All of that is in the pipeline for you tonight. But let's start in Zimbabwe. The civil service union leaders over there have been protesting against the government's reluctance to engage in wage negotiations. Just last week, the public servants rejected a proposal to increase their pay by $21 million. They said it wasn't enough given fast rising inflation. A follow-up meeting where an improved offer is expected to be tabled has been delayed twice now, and that prompted the demonstrations we saw in Harare on Tuesday. The civil servants have been demanding dollar salaries before the abolishment of the multi-currency regime back in June. They now want the salaries to be adjusted in line with the official foreign currency interbank market rate in order to keep up with the rising cost of living. Zimbabwe's year-on-year inflation rose to a 10-year high of over 175% in June, stoking fears and evoking bitter memories of a return to an economic meltdown that haunted the country a decade ago.
Whilst we no longer have the multi-currency regime, but the business remain charging at rated prices, which further renders our earnings useless, so to speak. So it is in the best interest of government to make sure that the plight of the civil servants is addressed, so that basically we regain the lost purchasing power. It's not like we are demanding a salary increase, no, but we are simply calling for the restoration of the purchasing power of what our salaries used to enable us to pay in October 2018.
All right, then let's get to the latest on this story from CGTN's Farai Makutuye. Joins us now live from Harare. Farai, there's a sense of deja vu around this story because back in March, I believe, civil servants accepted a 29% wage hike. But given this rapid rise in inflation, as they point out, the thing is, can the finance minister afford to increase pay hikes and still remain within his $8 billion budget?
Well, Rama, I think it is highly unlikely that he'll be able to do that. Last week, we saw that offer that was put on the table, $21 million. I would imagine that that is the best the finance minister could accommodate given the demand for resources that he's facing. Remember, Zimbabwe needs money to import electricity. It needs money to import fuel, to import grain, given some of the challenges that it's faced with rainfall and the drought and the need to feed people who are in need of food aid. So a huge demand on resources, and I would imagine that when Professor Mthuli Ncube put that offer on the table, that was perhaps the best he could do. Unfortunately, it is, hasn't sold with the people that he was pitching it to. So we may see him try to find another way to perhaps accommodate the demands of the civil servants, perhaps some non-monetary incentives to try and cushion them from the high cost of living. So it is a tough balancing act that he has to face, but given the circumstances, people say that he has to find some way of accommodating these demands because eventually these workers may be incapacitated, unable to turn up for work, Rama.
Indeed, that's the public sector side of it. But given that inflation problem, how's the private sector responding to wage hike demands and the rise in input prices as well?
Well, it is the same across the board. I think the brunt is being borne across the board, across all sectors. There are demands there by private sector workers for increments in order for them to be able to keep up with the rising cost of living. And private companies have responded. We know that back in March, the mining sector affected an 80% increment across the board. But the challenge, as with the civil servants, is that whatever increment is awarded, it is rendered worthless or is quickly eroded because of this unrelenting inflation. And so again, what we might see in the private sector is some of these non-monetary incentives, groceries being bought for employees, transport being provided by companies in order to eliminate some of those transport costs and to lower the burden, lighten the burden on their employees. Remember, any increase that a company makes in terms of wages will also make their production costs higher, render them uncompetitive in a market that is very price sensitive. You talked about input costs. Yes, they are going up, and the temptation, or what has happened in the past, is that has been passed on to the consumer. But we have a consumer now in Zimbabwe who has been so tightly squeezed, who's had to tighten their belt so much that they can't afford to pay any much more for any goods and services. And we've seen in the past, in the recent past, some goods that have had their prices come down because demand just isn't there anymore. And so companies will need to find ways to reduce their costs in order to be able to sustain their businesses, to be able to sell their goods and services, because the market to which they're trying to sell them just doesn't have that money, Rama.
Indeed. Let's go back to something you mentioned a little earlier. By some estimates, the government needs at least $218 million just to be able to deal with the aftermath of drought and to avoid having over 5 million people starve. What's the government doing to solve that problem?
Well, there isn't much. I mean, this is unforeseen, unbudgeted for expenditure. We know that there is a surplus that government has been running, that it's been able to achieve since the final quarter of 2018 and certainly into this year. So we'd imagine some of those resources would be put towards procuring grain for the people who require it. A tender is due to be released to procure some 700,000 metric tons of maize to meet that shortfall. But government, again, is cash strapped. It is facing challenges, and so it will look to some of its donor partners to step up and assist. The UN launched an appeal to try and assist Zimbabwe to bring in this grain and also to mitigate the impact of Cyclone Idai, a double whammy that Zimbabwe has suffered. Unfortunately, that appeal has been undersubscribed. Not as much money as had been hoped has been raised, and so that makes the situation even more dire for Zimbabwe. And so there is a requirement now to intensify the appeal, to try and get more people to step up, more donors to come forward and to help Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe is cash strapped, the government is cash strapped, doesn't have resources, is trying not to borrow, is trying to be fiscally disciplined, and so it is limited in terms of what it can do.
Indeed. One last question for you, Farai. So Econet Wireless as well, I understand they raised data prices today by anywhere between 30 to 50%. But there's another thing that's also affecting Zimbabwe's economy right now, rolling blackouts across the country. How are telcos adapting to that?
Well, Rama, I think, that is a challenge, a crisis that is being understated at this point in time, this power crisis, because it is wreaking havoc across industry, and the telcos haven't been spared. Where they had standby generators for some of their base stations, now those standby generators are effectively the ones that are, being used 24/7, because these power cuts are running 18 hours, some of them. And so that is having an impact on the cost structures of these telcos. It is squeezing their margins. These increments and increases that we're seeing, for instance, Econet Wireless today, is perhaps a direct response to the rising costs of doing business because of the requirements, to get fuel, diesel for their generators, amongst other things. But also it is having a bearing in terms of a reduction in terms of their revenues. Data consumption, mobile consumption will be lowered because people, can't place calls. Today, we've had had huge challenges with the network because of the power cuts. Calls are dropping, calls aren't going through, mobile money transactions are being held up and delayed, and so all that is squeezing the sector. It will try to mitigate it by increasing costs, but again, it comes back to the point I made earlier. The people that they're trying to charge and sell their products to don't have the money to be able to spend as much as they did, so it is pretty bleak at this point in time. We expect that the other telcos will follow suit to increase their tariffs, so it's a pretty difficult time for everyone, for the subscribers who are having to pay more, but also for the telcos who need to stay afloat.
Indeed, very rough times in Zimbabwe. Rama Nyang there live in Harare. Now, we're still in Zimbabwe. The price of fuel over there has gone up by 16%. It's an increase that's expected to pile on more misery to what you've just heard to the citizens that are now facing rolling power cuts and shortages of some critical commodities. Here's CGTN's Rama Nyang with the details on that.
Supplies have improved, but the headache for motorists now is forking out more for a litre of petrol or diesel, both of which went up over the weekend. Government says these prices are still the lowest in the region, but that's little comfort to hard-pressed Zimbabweans already contending with galloping inflation, now at 176%, a 10-year high.
We are in July, and this is the third time. This is the third time so far that, it's like fuel has gone up, and no increment. No increment. I want to emphasize the point, no increment has been offered to workers. You find funeral policies, everything has gone up, deducting from the little that people are getting. And, we are left with nothing, virtually nothing.
Wage negotiations between civil servants and government are deadlocked. A fresh round of talks is due, where workers will push for a figure that beats the cost of the basket of goods used to calculate inflation.
It has to have some meaning to what happens to salary increases as well, because that basket is filled with the basic things that a family needs to survive. So if we don't go around 800, 900 and 1,000, and I know there are still proponents out there who think that much is too little.
The government claims prices will begin to come down by October as the impact of stabilizing reforms kick in. But not everyone here is convinced.
We're not sure where we're going as a nation. All we know is that the situation right now is very difficult. We're suffering and hoping that things will improve, but nothing is changing.
President Emmerson Mnangagwa has called for patience in the face of the growing frustration, which has dented hopes some here had that he could quickly turn around the fortunes of an economy that had been in decline for nearly 2 decades. Rama Nyang, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Right, then a quick run through some company headlines now for you. Let's start in Nigeria. The country's state-owned oil firm, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, has contracted some 34 firms in efforts to continue its exchange of crude oil for refined fuel produce. Now, the firms responsible for the exchange deal have grown by 120% in the wake of the issuance of these award letters. Elsewhere, Tonga Tula is seeking to freeze about $793 million of its debt by July. The firm aims to recover from the impact of having to restate its accounts, with its debt spending currently at about $72 million a year. It's in the process of selling its assets and cutting costs as part of efforts to strengthen its balance sheet. Saudi Arabia's state defense firm is continuing the commercial partnership talks with South Africa's Denel, looking essentially for a stake in the arms maker. Denel is open to partnerships, but it refuses to sell equity or relinquish intellectual property rights to the Saudi arms maker. In 2018, SAMI made a $1 billion bid for a broad partnership with the South African arms firm. And finally, Kenya Airways has gotten a 3-year air service license from the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority that effectively paves the way for the carrier to start new domestic routes to several places, including Wajir up north, Homa Bay over in the west, and to the Masai Mara. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll be exploring how the deserts of Niger hold an abundant supply of renewable power. We'll also tell you why taxi-hailing app drivers are fed up with low commissions over in Kenya. All that and more is coming up next.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidu. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Now, despite having access to steady, brilliant sunshine all year round, barely 11% of Niger's population, as we speak, has access to the country's electricity grid. There are over 3.8 million households with no access to power, and this nation of 21 million people has just under 300 megawatts of installed generation capacity. Most of that runs entirely on fossil fuels. But the thing is, Niger is not alone in having limited access to clean grid power, despite having abundant sunshine over the 1.2 million square kilometers it covers. According to World Bank data, what you're looking at now, the central and the northern end of the country, anything in yellow and red, have the most potential to generate large-scale electricity from the sun. So, while we were in the country, I explored how Niger could become a net electricity exporter with the president of the African Development Bank.
Take a look at Niger. I was in Chad recently with President Idriss Deby. I got off the plane. It was 48 degrees. So if you think it's hot here, it's 48 degrees. And the minister that was with me, I left him on the tarmac and I ran into the car. And he said, well, you left me on the tarmac. I said, well, look, I don't want to have a heat stroke on the tarmac. We got in to see President Idriss Deby. I said, Mr. President, he told me, you know, Chad, Niger, they're all the same area in the Sahel. They tell me that your access rate, electricity access rate, is 8%. You say, no, it's not 8%, it's 5%. And I said, well, Mr. President, I've been here for 2 days. If you take a look at my skin, it's so hot. I'm like a solar PV panel right now. You can put a cable on my skin and you can power a house, and it cracked off. But the point I want to make is that I didn't say, Mr. President, why don't you consider a policy, a strategic policy, to harness the sun and turn it into electricity, and make it compulsory for all households in your country to have solar PV panels. Remove all taxes on the import of the PV panels. Make sure that for installation, no taxes, and also maintenance. You know, right in front of me, in less than 5 minutes, the president made that decision. Right now, that's making its way for ratification. That means the whole of the country will be able to use solar panels. And I was in conversations with President Ibeka of Keita of Mali, President Yusufu here, and also President Kabore of Burkina Faso on exactly the same thing. And they all said, yes, we are going to do the same also. We're ready to do that for all of our countries. What that means then is that the limited amount of grid power you have, you can concentrate that on your industries. But when it comes to lighting up, you can actually just use the power of the sun. You know, God gave us the sun for a reason. You know, we should just turn that into real energy for ourselves.
But what about the grid-connected solutions? Because at some point you'll have to get to that.
No, absolutely, yeah. But I wanted to say something in the broader Sahelian area. You know, we at the African Development Bank, we've launched something that's called the Desert to Power. The Desert to Power is to power the entire Sahel to make it the world's largest solar zone. And that would provide electricity for 250 million people. 90 million of those would be off-grid systems. So you do need the off-grid systems because the population density in many of these areas is very, very, very low. And so the cost of transmission of energy, it's very, very high. So you need off-grid solutions, mini-grid solutions, but you also need grid-based solutions. And we are doing that. So for example, you take a look at here in Niger when you ask me the question, there is a dam here. It's a very big dam. It's called Kandaji Dam. And we are investing in that Kandaji Dam. Our board just approved for us, just last week, $148 million to invest in that Kandaji Dam. They have about roughly 45,000 hectares that can do for agriculture, and it can allow them to have hydropower for 130 megawatts. So that is going to be for grid. But at the end of the day, you have to have an energy mix. That you can use your hydro, that you can use where you have geothermal. But my goodness, you know, I mean, when God said, electricity, you know, when God said, let there be light, and there was light, there's a reason for that. That means that the solar actually can allow you to be able to have a significant share of your energy needs met in a way that is renewable and in a way that is clean.
Back in East Africa, the two-day inaugural Afro-Asia FinTech Conference wrapped up in the Kenyan capital. Leaders in the financial industry have been calling for innovative ways to bring in the 1 in 4 Africans who still don't have access to the financial services industry into the fold. CGTN's Wilkiston Yabwa was there.
We are concluding with optimism.
The second day of the Afro-Asia FinTech Conference saw thousands of delegates assemble yet again to discuss how technology could be used to support banking and financial systems in Africa. While almost 80% of Africans have access to financial services, experts are concerned about the 20% who still have no access to these services. Several studies have found that there are many barriers to overcome in order to reach the unbanked populations.
In fact, the estimate is that it takes at the minimum at least 2 to 3 months worth of income to get a simple smartphone. This is notwithstanding the fact that the cost of smartphones over the last 5 years has fallen by 50%, and the cost of making a call has fallen by 70%, is still inaccessible to as many as 1 in 4 that we are targeting to support.
Many more still struggle to access data, with Africa lagging behind in internet access. The two-day festival, co-hosted by the Central Bank of Kenya and the Monetary Authority of Singapore, provided a platform for an exchange of ideas between Africa and Asia as they explored sustainable innovations in financial services. The leaders explored fields such as artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, SME financing, and financial literacy. They also discussed how to create business environments and regulatory frameworks that would nurture innovations.
The way the rules have been written have been written for incumbent businesses. And to expect the very same licensing, regulatory, reporting structures to then apply to a business that is designed to be disruptive, designed to be fundamentally different from what already exists, means that we also need to look, take a step back and not bind our own hands with the regulations that are in place.
Kenya remains a lucrative fintech market with numerous commercial activities run through online portals and paid for on the innovative M-Pesa mobile payment platform. Bulkis Anyabwa, CGTN.
We're still in Kenya, where drivers who work for taxi-hailing firms like Uber and Bolt have gone on strike. They're protesting against what they describe as unfair commissions, and they want the firms to more than double the amount that they currently charge per kilometre. Uber is currently charging clients about 16 cents a kilometre. Bolt charges 14 cents. Now, the drivers, however, want those charges increased to a minimum of 50 cents a kilometre. The strike comes at a time when inflation in June was about 5.7% compared to 4.28% at the same time last year. Consumers in East Africa feel burdened by an increase in the price of commodities, covering everything from utilities like water, gas and rent to select foodstuffs and even housing.
We want the rates to be regulated so that we can earn at least 50 US cents and not less than that per kilometre. The amount will be reasonable enough because at the current rate, drivers are suffering. We are fatigued and we do not have enough to meet our daily needs and expenses.
The reason we are here is we want to be heard. We are willing, all these drivers are willing to sit down. We have our leaders who have been sitting with these people and they have not listened. But now, since they have not been honoring our agreements with them, that is why we want the government to come in and regulate. We are not fighting. We are not fighting the government. We are not fighting Uber. We don't want an investor to run out of this country. We want them to stay, but under the rules of this land.
Now then, internet penetration levels are growing quite fast in Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, but the quality of service isn't improving at the level you would expect. According to a UK-based price comparison website, Nigeria's internet download speeds are actually among the slowest on the planet. So why is it that Nigerians aren't enjoying quality services? CGTN's Deja Badmus went to find out.
If there's one place in Africa where internet penetration is growing very rapidly, it's Nigeria. As at March this year, Nigerian Communication Commission (NCC), the body that regulates internet and telecom services in the country, says there were 115.9 million internet users in Nigeria. That figure may have even gone higher now. But while more Nigerians are getting connected online, the quality is becoming an issue, which is exactly what the UK-based price comparison website Cable captured in its report, something almost every Nigerian internet user agrees with.
It's very annoying actually. Like sometimes I just quit, like just leave it for like yesterday I was trying to download a movie and it was like on Net Nigeria it showed like how many days before it would download, like more than 3 days. So I was like, am I going to stay here for more than 3 days?
It's very, very frustrating. Like it's unexplainable, but I don't know. I don't know what the cause could be, but if they could find a solution, I'll be very happy.
Virtually all the internet service providers in Nigeria claim to offer 4G LTE service, which is supposed to come with high-speed internet. But rather than improve, the quality of internet speed is deteriorating. Experts say the problem lies squarely with infrastructure.
One is the issue of power. Two is the issue of legacy devices that they have within their network. Like some of the providers still use 3G devices. You know, and 3G is limited, the speed you can have on 3G is limited. And again, the issue of vandals, where you have a lot of downtime due to maybe when they have a fiber optic cable cut here and there, they switch to the next available method for them to transmit, like using microwave radios. Microwave radios cannot carry as much capacity as a fiber optic cable will carry.
There's also the problem of capacity for some of the service providers, who are literally biting more than they could chew.
Let me use road networks to give you that example. When you have a 4-lane road and you have fewer vehicles on that road, they could move at faster speeds. But when you have more vehicles on that road, even though it's a 4-lane road, those vehicles will move at a slower pace. So for you to move faster on those, you have to increase the number of lanes so that more vehicles can come on it and move faster. That's exactly what we need to do about capacity.
It's not as if it's impossible to get good quality internet speed in Nigeria. You actually can, especially in big cities like Lagos and Abuja. But the problem is that it comes at a premium, and not many can afford it.
The cost of running every base station is very expensive. And then as a businessman, you have to, factor that into your profit. So again, if you want good internet, you have to pay for it.
Despite the slow speed, more and more Nigerians are still embracing the internet and getting connected, hoping that someday soon, the issue of speed will be a thing of the past. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for another break. Here's what's coming up next. Facebook is defending its digital cryptocurrency Libra before American legislators. And we'll tickle your taste buds with a touch of bird droppings from Brazil. It's pretty good though. Trust me on that one. You'll see it when we come back.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
Reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back. These are the stories making your headlines at this hour. 10 Turkish sailors have been taken hostage by armed pirates off the coast of Nigeria on Tuesday. The shipping company Kadyoglu Denizcilik said that 8 other sailors were also aboard the vessel at the time. The firm says that its Turkish-flagged cargo ship was attacked in the Gulf of Guinea as it sailed from Cameroon to Cote d'Ivoire. There was no freight on the vessel at the time of the attack. UNICEF has warned that the Ebola outbreak in the DRC is proving to be deadlier among under 5s than ever before. More than 2,500 Ebola cases have been reported so far in the country. According to the World Health Organization, over 1,500 people have died in the provinces of Ituri and North Kivu so far. And finally, the former South African President Jacob Zuma dropped yet another bombshell on the second day of his testimony. He's alleging that a death threat was made against him. Mr. Zuma continues to testify before the Zondo Commission of Inquiry about allegations of corruption and state capture. That's a run through your headlines. Now let's dive into the tech world for a moment. America's social networking company, Facebook, recently launched its own cryptocurrency project called Libra. But American officials are concerned about a range of things, privacy right at the top, but also money laundering, customer protection and financial sector stability too. The head of Calibra, which is part of that wider Libra project, David Marcus, has appeared before the Senate Banking Committee to talk about how Facebook will deal with those risks. So then let's bring you up to speed with the latest developments on that front. Giles Gibson has been following developments. He joins me now live from Washington, D.C. So Giles, the Facebook executive in charge of this program, David Marcus, he's arguing that Libra is not intended to compete with sovereign currency, but it is based on fiat currencies, essentially providing the same service, acting as a medium of exchange. So how is it not a competitor?
Yeah, well, David Marcus has wrapped up his testimony to the Senate Banking Committee just in the last couple of hours, and he really stressed in particular to this issue that you're raising, the role of the Libra Association that they're going to set up. They say it's going to be a non-profit organization based in Geneva in Switzerland, and it will be made up of Facebook, but also some of its co-founders in this project, including MasterCard, Uber, a whole range of different companies from across different sectors. Now, on this exact point of whether it would be this type of sovereign currency, Marcus said that the Libra Association will work with the Federal Reserve and other central banks to make sure Libra does not compete with sovereign currencies or interfere with monetary policy. That testimony is still pretty vague, so at this stage we don't really know how they're actually going to make sure that it doesn't compete with those things that he was talking about.
Indeed. Steve Mnuchin has also weighed in. He's expressing concerns about Libra being used for potentially money laundering, for instance, or other illicit transactions. But what specific measures does he want to be done in order to forestall those problems?
Yeah, the US Treasury Secretary hasn't said exactly what he wants to actually do to this. We've only had very sort of vague comments again from him about Facebook's Libra project. He raised concerns about money launderers and terrorist financiers using this platform for what he called illicit activities, but he didn't really go beyond that in terms of what he wants his administration and his department to actually do about it. Of course, this is a very hot topic issue because just this week in Spain, there's been a criminal gang accused of using Bitcoin ATMs to launder money from drug-related activities. So clearly the concern is that Libra would be even bigger than Bitcoin and therefore even more open to abuse and illicit activities.
Indeed, certainly memories of the Silk Road probably coming up for American authorities there. One of the other interesting arguments I saw in David Marcus's prepared comments before he testified was he's arguing that if the US doesn't basically take the lead on this, someone else will, and the US will not just be left playing catch-up, someone else will be making those rules for digital currencies. But does that argument resonate on Capitol Hill?
It seems to be, because that was actually the very first question that David Marcus faced from the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee. He said, do you agree that the United States needs to take the lead on this issue and on regulating cryptocurrencies overall? And David Marcus very quickly said he did agree and he believed that the US should lead. But of course, this is not really a project that's going to be limited to the borders of the United States. France's foreign minister has already weighed in on Libra's position in the global financial system. He talked about questions about whether it would become a sovereign currency. He said it can't and it must not happen. So clearly not just US regulators who are going to be involved in the coming months of figuring out how to handle Facebook's new project.
Indeed. One last question for you, Charles. What regulatory bodies, at least in the US, does Facebook need to register with, or at least Libra needs to register with, in order to be allowed to actually launch Libra formally for use in the US?
The honest answer to that question is we just don't know this at this stage, because we've got reports that the Securities and Exchange Commission here in the United States has been speaking to Facebook executives, trying to figure out exactly how they're going to classify Libra and therefore whether it would come under their umbrella of regulations. We also understand that Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, he has said openly that he's set up a working group to look into some of these issues around Libra. And experts in regulation are saying that if Libra wants to become this sort of international force as soon as the middle of next year, then it's going to have to figure out deals with hundreds, if not thousands, of different regulators all around the world.
Indeed. Let's see how all this does play out. We're certainly in new territory here. Charles Gibson in Washington, D.C. Thank you. On to Europe now, where the German Defence Minister Ursula von der Leyen has secured a narrow win to lead the European Union's 751-seat parliament. Von der Leyen was nominated by the European Council after marathon talks in June, but she had to rely on votes from the far right and populist MEPs to actually get to that position. The European Commission is voting this week on a number of key issues involving the alliance. The issue that was drawing the most attention is a just concluded vote on who will lead the Union's Parliament. CGTN's Natalie Carney reports from Munich.
The odds have been pointing towards Ursula von der Leyen getting the EU's top job. She's the first woman to be nominated for the position, a mother of 7, born and raised in Belgium and with a wealth of political experience in Germany.
Ursula von der Leyen is one of the leading politicians of the Conservative Party. She's been Minister for the Labour Market. She's currently Minister of Defence. She's born abroad. She speaks foreign languages, so she's very cosmopolitan. I think the more people think about it, the more they think in Germany that she is a suitable candidate.
All 28 EU member countries agreed that the 60-year-old German defence minister would be a suitable replacement for Jean-Claude Juncker, who's run the European Commission since 2014.
I was overwhelmed and I feel very honored to be nominated as the president of the Commission by the Council. When I heard about it yesterday, I decided that my very first stop will be here at Strasbourg to meet the European Parliament and to go immediately into talks with the parliamentarians, because here in the European Parliament is where the heart of democracy, of the European democracy, is beating.
Many are frustrated by the way in which she was nominated. Traditionally, the top job goes to the Spitzenkandidat, the head of the European Parliamentary Party that gets the most votes. Yet von der Leyen's name was put forward by the European Council after several days of closed-door meetings, leaving some to call her nomination undemocratic.
The European Parliament didn't really play any role in her choosing, no? I think the Spitzenkandidat rule is flawed, but it's better than being chosen behind closed doors by European Council leaders.
And I think that they have now decided over and above the opinion of the people. We voted for somebody and they have now decided that it will be somebody else. I have mixed feelings. I'm not 100% happy with how they went about it.
However, Manfred Weber, head of the European People's Party, withdrew as Spitzenkandidat after not receiving enough support from European leaders, leaving the door open for von der Leyen. Natalie Carney for CGTN in Munich.
All right, then let's head over to Brazil now for what really isn't your usual cup of coffee. Coffee beans picked up from the droppings of a bird in Brazil are the source of one of the most expensive coffee varieties on the planet. Our correspondent, Paulo Cabral, visited a farm in the Brazilian state of Minas Gerais to investigate and sample some of these beans.
It's harvest time at this farm in Brazil dedicated to specialty coffee. This worker is picking one variety of berries from the thousands of trees planted on the hillside. This other worker is also picking coffee, but in a very different way. He looks for the droppings of a local bird, the jacu, which feeds on the coffee berries on the plantation, then drops the digested beans behind. They are then collected, sun-dried, separated, and later roasted into premium coffee. This farmer says he produces just a small quantity of the jacu coffee using drops of the wild birds that freely flock to his plantation. But there are already farmers looking to produce jacu coffee in larger quantities.
Before I heard about the possibilities of jacu coffee, I saw the bird in my plantation, but I thought it was only a problem because it damaged the trees. But then a local roaster told us about it and said they wanted to try out producing this coffee. So we started paying attention and noticed we had a lot of it in our area.
In premium coffee markets, varieties digested by animals are among the most expensive sold. The Brazilian jacu is just one example. And here, 1 kilo of jacu bird coffee goes for about $60. And this is actually the first time I'm going to try the jacu coffee, and our expert barista already suggested that I should try it on paper filter instead of the espresso. So I'm going to have a sip of water to clean up my taste buds and see what this is about. And there it comes, nice and hot. And let's see. Thank you. Very interesting taste, very good coffee. I can taste a very good coffee. I'm not really an expert to say what are the details, but certainly it's a good, strong coffee. And I can tell you, it's a very interesting experience to be drinking a coffee that has already been inside a bird.
The jacu bird has a natural instinct to select only the ripest coffee berries, so the quality begins in the selection. Then, when it goes through the jacu's digestive system, it slightly changes the taste of the bean, leaving the coffee more acidic, with citrus notes, something like the hint of a lemon.
This roaster says the amount of jacu coffee traded is small, but that it's an important example of the country's premium coffee varieties.
It's important for us to educate consumers, to bring this kind of information to the coffee market. We need to make clear that there is a difference between mass and premium coffee, just like, for example, with specialty beers and chocolates.
Brazil is by far the world's largest producer of coffee and tops exports too, but industry leaders complain the country's name is more associated with quantity than quality, and hope specialties like jacu bird coffee will help change that perception. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, Carmo de Minas, Brazil.
All right, I just got one more thing to add to my bucket list of things to consume before I die. Now then, quick run through commodity prices here for you. Nickel prices, it's the best performing metal commodity so far. Its prices actually hit an 11-month high earlier today. Nickel's up 30% so far in the year, about 13,900 a ton. On the other hand, copper also relatively flat so far in the year. 3-month futures over in London up about 0.8% at 11:05 GMT, just under $5,980 a ton on that commodity. Keep that in mind because we're going to talk about Zambia later on in the program. Here's what's coming up next. A rising unemployment rate is forcing graduates to start their own businesses in Nigeria. And we'll look at a Ghanaian nonprofit that's promoting diversity in boardrooms across Africa.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures
Here in Kanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's head over to Nigeria now. The unemployment rate in Africa's most populous country is at a record high of over 23%. For millions of graduates who can't find work, startups have become a bit of a lifeline. From the nation's capital, our correspondent Phil Ihaza reports on some of these stories.
Donna Akindele runs this salon and bridal shop with a number of trainees by her side. After completing her university degree 5 years ago, she spent 2 years looking for a job, but had to resort to becoming an entrepreneur.
So I graduated from school and I didn't find a white-collar job, so I decided to make hairstyling professional, and that is what I do, and I think I'm doing well for myself. I also started training young graduates, just like me, in skills like makeup, tailoring, and also hairstyling, and in order for them to be self-employed, and that is what we are doing right now.
According to the National Bureau of Statistics, around 19 million people make up the workforce in Nigeria, but over 20 million of them, mainly youths, are currently unemployed. And just like Akindele, there's a trend of young graduates taking up new crafts in the absence of formal jobs in order to earn a living. Experts say this may be a turning point for Nigeria's struggling economy, but the government will need to improve the country's infrastructure and create an enabling environment for these businesses to grow.
Entrepreneurship itself requires good environment to operate. They may not altogether need 100% power supply, but they will need some meaningful level of energy to be provided. Another thing they require is trained labor before capital. So what we should do is we need to train people, change our curriculum, let it be entrepreneurship focused, particularly from primary school to secondary school and to higher institution.
And already, donors trainees are beginning to see themselves as entrepreneurs rather than applicants.
I don't even want to look for a white-collar job because I'm not really interested in it anymore. Looking at how demanding makeup is, I think I'll make more money in makeup than white-collar job.
In the nearest future, I would probably open a beauty place where I would then train other people to work under me.
In the last 4 years, the government has placed at least 700,000 youths across the country in empowerment programs like the N-Power scheme, which seeks to train young graduates in various skills. But the unemployment figures continue to soar.
Skills and knowledge are the driving forces of economic growth and social development. And experts say harnessing Nigeria's young demography through appropriate skill development could provide more lucrative opportunity for millions of its citizens and transform Africa's largest economy. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
A Ghanaian non-profit, the Boardroom Africa, is on a mission to promote exceptional female talent all the way to the very top. The argument they're making is that boardroom diversity can actually spur the growth of businesses across the board. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai filed this report from Accra.
Aisha Bidwe has risen through the ranks to take one of the top jobs in her company. As a governance board member, she now helps to steer her firm's future.
The journey really, has never been straightforward. I don't think anybody's journey is straightforward. There's always been, curves, there's been bends in the road, there's been hills, there's been valleys. But I think what is important and what has always been consistent is the fact that it takes a lot of hard work and determination. There's no shortcuts. And I know this is the same thing everybody says, but that's the truth.
A 2015 research by global management consulting firm McKinsey shows that women make up only 14% of board directors and 5% of CEOs in Africa. With such low representation of women in the workplace, non-profit organization The Boardroom Africa is looking to get more women like Aisha Bidwe into positions of power.
Research shows across board that when boards are diverse, companies perform better. And they perform better because there are diverse opinions. And so men and women all come from different backgrounds and all have different experiences. And being a woman, you come out with a set of experiences that are quite diverse from being a man.
The organization is mapping out Africa's listed boards to determine how many women sit on each one. It hopes to connect its unique pool of talented career women to those boards. Still, many women have to overcome a lot of hurdles to succeed in the corporate world.
If you look at this issue of pregnancy and childbearing, it's a huge barrier. There are some women who skip promotion because they got pregnant, they had to go and deliver and come back. So you see their mates are far gone ahead of them, and there's nothing done about it. You see that in some corporate institution now in Ghana, they are asking the women, if I hire you for the first 2 years, don't give birth.
Also inhibiting female women development in the workplace is sexual harassment, a situation gender advocates want addressed. According to the United Nations, the unequal treatment of women costs sub-Saharan Africa $105 billion per year. Equality campaigners believe improvements to ensure women are not discriminated against in the workplace will be crucial for Africa's development. Aisha Bidwe has shaped her career through hard work and perseverance. Now, she hopes to shape the careers of other young women and find them a seat at the boardroom table. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Right then, one last run through the currencies here for you. So there's still a bit of a flood of Kenya shilling liquidity in the market, and that in part explains why you're seeing a 103.10 number to the dollar. We've been seeing a steady increase in the weakness really in the dollar shilling pair since March, when the rate was actually around 99 shillings or so. Central bankers in the market earlier today with a repo of about $145 million trying to essentially remove some liquidity from circulation. Zambia's bonds still doing rather well. The yields did fall on that. Prices did actually go up a fair bit on the 2022 note from about 66 cents to the dollar all the way to about 70 or so. But can they hold on to those prices? We'll see and update you. That's it for tonight's edition of the program. Thank you very much for watching Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. There's several ways of getting your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Rama Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.